The moment Natalie Everett stumbled into the dusty street of Lincoln, Nebraska, her ivory dress torn and stained with travel, her face sunburned beyond recognition, every eye turned toward her with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. It was the summer of 1878, and women did not simply appear out of nowhere in a railroad town bustling with cattle trade and frontier ambition. She clutched nothing but the tattered fabric hanging from her shoulders. No bag, no hat, no provisions of any kind. And when she finally collapsed near the wooden steps of the general store, it was Owen Bailey who dismounted from his bay mare and caught her before her head struck the ground. Owen had been hauling supplies from his ranch just outside of town, a modest spread where he ran about 200 head of cattle with the help of 3 hired hands. At 26 years old, he had the weathered look of a man who had spent his entire adult life under the relentless sun, but his eyes held a gentleness that contradicted the hardness of his calloused hands. He lifted Natalie easily, carrying her into the shade of the general store's covered porch while the owner, Mr. Henderson, rushed to bring water. "What happened to her?" Henderson asked, his round face creased with concern as he handed Owen a tin cup filled to the brim. "Cannot say yet," Owen replied, cradling Natalie's head as he brought the cup to her cracked lips. "But she needs help more than she needs questions right now." Natalie's eyes fluttered open, revealing the most striking green irises Owen had ever seen, even dulled by exhaustion as they were. She tried to speak, but only a rasping sound emerged. Owen shushed her gently, encouraging her to drink more water before attempting words. The small crowd that had gathered began whispering among themselves, speculating about where she might have come from, and what circumstances could have brought her to such a desperate state. "Let us give her some air," Owen said firmly, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone accustomed to managing both livestock and men. The crowd dispersed reluctantly, though several women lingered, their faces showing genuine concern beneath their bonnets. After several minutes and 2 more cups of water, Natalie found her voice. "The wagon," she whispered hoarsely. "There was an accident. Everyone else." Her voice broke, and tears began streaming down her dusty cheeks, leaving clean tracks through the grime. Owen exchanged a glance with Henderson. "How far back?" he asked gently. "I walked for 2 days, I think. Maybe longer. I lost track of time." Her accent carried the refinement of Eastern education, which only deepened the mystery of her presence on this frontier. "My father, my aunt, our driver, they were all killed when the wagon went over the embankment. I tried to help them, but there was nothing I could do. I took what water I could carry in my hands, but it was not enough." "You are saying you walked through the prairie alone for 2 days with no supplies?" Henderson shook his head in disbelief. "Young lady, you are either blessed by Providence or too stubborn to die." "Perhaps both," Owen said, helping her to sit up more fully. "Can you stand?" "I have a room at the boarding house. You can rest there, and Mrs. Carleton will help you get cleaned up proper." Natalie looked at him with an expression that mingled gratitude and wariness. "I cannot pay you. I have nothing left. Everything I owned was in that wagon, and I assume it has all been scattered or stolen by now." Owen met her gaze steadily, and something passed between them in that moment, an understanding that transcended the practical concerns of frontier survival. "Material things fade," he said quietly. "Your spirit shines forever. You walked 2 days through hell itself to survive. That tells me everything I need to know about your worth." The words hung in the hot afternoon air like a benediction, and Natalie felt something shift inside her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the Nebraska sun. She nodded, accepting his help as he lifted her to her feet. Her legs trembled beneath her, and Owen steadied her with one arm around her waist, supporting her weight as naturally as if they had known each other for years rather than minutes. Mrs. Carlton, a robust widow in her 50s who ran the boarding house with efficiency and a surprisingly soft heart, took one look at Natalie and immediately began issuing orders. Within an hour, Natalie found herself in a copper tub filled with warm water, scrubbing away the layers of dirt and dried blood from scratches she barely remembered receiving. Mrs. Carlton had provided soap that smelled of lavender and a rough towel, along with a simple cotton dress that had belonged to her daughter before she had married and moved to Omaha. "It will be a bit loose on you," Mrs. Carlton said, eyeing Natalie's slender frame. "You need feeding up, that is certain, but it will serve until we can arrange something better." "I am grateful for your kindness," Natalie said, her voice still rough but stronger now. "I fear I have nothing to offer in return except my labor." "Perhaps I could work here, help you with the boarding house." Mrs. Carlton's expression softened. "Owen Bailey already paid for your room and board for the next 2 weeks, said you were not to worry about it." "That young man has a heart bigger than this whole territory, though he hides it well enough most times." Natalie felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the bathwater. "He barely knows me. Why would he do such a thing?" "Because that is who he is," Mrs. Carlton replied simply. "Lost his own family when he was just 18. His parents and younger sister to cholera during the wagon train journey west. He knows what it means to lose everything and have to start from nothing. Built that ranch of his from dirt and determination, and he never forgot what it felt like to be helpless." The information settled over Natalie like a blanket, heavy with significance. She had been so absorbed in her own grief, and shocked that she had not considered what might drive a stranger to such immediate and unquestioning generosity. Now, understanding that Owen spoke from experience, his words about material things fading took on deeper meaning. That evening, after Natalie had rested and eaten her first real meal in days, Owen returned to check on her condition. Mrs. Carlton showed him to the small parlor where Natalie sat in a wooden chair by the window, watching the sun set over the dusty street. She turned when he entered, and Owen was struck by how different she looked now that the layers of desperation had been washed away. She was beautiful, certainly, but it was more than that. There was intelligence in her eyes, and a resilience that he recognized because he saw it in the mirror each morning. "You look considerably improved," he said, taking the chair across from her at Mrs. Carlton's gesture. "Thanks to your generosity," Natalie replied. "Mrs. Carlton tells me you have covered my expenses. I assure you I will repay every cent once I am able to find employment." Owen waved a hand dismissively. "We can discuss that later. Right now, I need to ask you some questions if you are up to it, practical matters that cannot wait." Natalie straightened her spine, preparing herself. "Of course. You have family back east who should be notified. Anyone expecting you to arrive somewhere?" The question brought fresh tears to Natalie's eyes, but she blinked them back with determination. "My mother died when I was 12. My father was all I had left, and he was bringing me west because he had accepted a position as a schoolteacher in a town called Kearney. My aunt came along because she was a widow with no children and nowhere else to go. There is no one else." Owen absorbed this information with a slow nod. "What about the wagon site? Can you describe where it happened? We should send someone to recover the bodies, give them proper burial." Natalie closed her eyes, clearly forcing herself to remember details she would rather forget. There was a steep hill, and the road curved sharply. Our driver was trying to manage the descent, but one of the wheels struck a large rock. The whole wagon tipped and went sliding down the embankment. It must have rolled 3 or 4 times. I was thrown clear early, landed in some brush that broke my fall. The others were not so fortunate. Was this before or after you crossed the Platte River? After. We had crossed several days before the accident. The driver said we were making good time, that we would reach Kearney within another week. Owen calculated mentally. That gives me enough to work with. I will take a couple of men and head out tomorrow to find the site. It is the right thing to do. I should go with you, Natalie said, though her voice wavered even as she made the offer. No, Owen said firmly but not unkindly. You have been through enough. What you need now is rest and recovery. Let me handle this. Natalie wanted to argue, feeling somehow that it was her responsibility to see her father and aunt properly laid to rest, but exhaustion was already pulling at her limbs. Will you tell me when you find them? I will, Owen promised. And if there is anything salvageable from your belongings, I will bring it back for you. Over the next 3 days, while Owen was away searching for the wagon site, Natalie found herself slowly integrating into the rhythm of life at Mrs. Carleton's boarding house. Despite protests, she insisted on helping with daily chores, finding comfort in the routine of cooking, cleaning, and serving meals to the handful of permanent residents. The physical labor helped quiet her mind, though grief would ambush her at unexpected moments. A particular smell or sound triggering memories of her father's laugh or her aunt's gentle hands braiding her hair. Mrs. Carleton proved to be excellent company, full of stories about the early days of Lincoln and the various characters who had passed through over the years. She spoke often of Owen, and Natalie found herself listening with particular attention whenever his name arose. He could have married any number of women in this territory, Mrs. Carleton said one afternoon as they were folding linens. Lord knows enough have set their caps for him. He has land, he is hard-working, and he is not hard on the eyes either, but he never seemed interested. I always thought maybe he was still carrying grief for his family, that he had not made room in his heart for new attachments. Some wounds take longer to heal than others, Natalie observed quietly. True enough, but 8 years is a long time to stay closed off from the possibility of happiness. Mrs. Carleton gave Natalie a meaningful look, though I noticed he looked at you differently than he looks at most people. Natalie felt her cheeks warm. You are imagining things. He was simply being kind to someone in desperate circumstances. I have known that boy since he first arrived in Lincoln with nothing but the clothes on his back and $50 he had earned working odd jobs along the trail. I know the difference between his general kindness and his particular interest. Mrs. Carleton smiled knowingly. Mark my words, dear. Owen Bailey is smitten, even if he does not fully realize it yet. The conversation left Natalie feeling unsettled in a way she could not quite name. She was still mourning her father and aunt, still processing the trauma of the accident and her desperate journey to Lincoln. The last thing she should be thinking about was romance, especially with a man she barely knew. And yet, she could not deny that Owen had occupied her thoughts more than was strictly appropriate. She found herself watching for his return, listening for his voice, remembering the gentle way he had caught her when she fell, and the profound simplicity of his words about material things fading. Owen returned on the afternoon of the 4th day, dust-covered and grim-faced. He found Natalie in the kitchen helping Mrs. Carleton prepare supper, and the look in his eyes told her everything before he spoke a word. We found them, he said quietly. We buried them proper on a hill overlooking the prairie, said some words over them. It seemed right. Natalie set down the knife she had been using to chop vegetables, her hand suddenly unsteady. Thank you, she whispered. Did you mark the graves? We did. Carved markers with their names. Your father was carrying papers in his coat pocket that survived the accident. That is how we confirmed his identity and your aunt's." Owen pulled a small bundle from his saddlebag. "I brought back what I could salvage. It is not much, I am afraid. Most everything was scattered or destroyed." The bundle contained a leather-bound journal that had belonged to her father, a silver locket that had been her mother's, a small daguerreotype in a cracked frame showing Natalie as a child with both her parents, and a few letters tied with ribbon. Natalie clutched these items to her chest, tears flowing freely now. These scraps of her former life were suddenly precious beyond measure, tangible connections to the people she had lost. Owen stood awkwardly, clearly unsure whether to offer comfort or give her space. "Mrs. Carlton made the decision for him, gently pushing him toward Natalie. "Go on, boy. She needs a shoulder and you have two perfectly good ones." Owen stepped forward and carefully put his arms around Natalie, who turned into his embrace and sobbed against his chest. He held her quietly, one hand making slow circles on her back, offering the silent comfort of presence. They stood that way for several minutes while Mrs. Carlton discreetly busied herself at the stove, and when Natalie finally pulled back, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, something had shifted between them again. The boundaries of stranger and rescuer had blurred into something more intimate, more real. "I am sorry," Natalie said, embarrassed by her emotional display. "You have already done so much, and here I am weeping all over you." "Grief is not something to apologize for," Owen said simply. "You lost your family. You are entitled to mourn them." "My father would have liked you," Natalie said suddenly, the thought occurring to her with such clarity that she spoke it aloud without considering whether it was appropriate. "He believed in the goodness of people, in helping those who needed help. He would have appreciated what you did, both for me and for him." Owen's expression softened. "Then I am glad I could honor his memory in some small way." Over the following weeks, Natalie settled into life in Lincoln with surprising ease, though the grief remained a constant companion. She continued helping Mrs. Carlton at the boarding house, and word spread through town about the educated Eastern woman who had survived such tragedy. Several townspeople approached her with offers of employment, but it was the schoolmaster, Mr. Thompson, who made the most compelling case. "I heard your father was coming to teach in Kearney," Mr. Thompson said when he visited the boarding house one afternoon. "If teaching runs in your family, I could use an assistant. The children here are growing in number, and I cannot manage them all alone. The pay is modest, but it is honest work." Natalie felt her heart lift at the possibility. She had been educated by her father, who had instilled in her a love of learning and teaching. The idea of continuing his legacy in this way felt right, a way to honor his memory while building a new life for herself. "I would be grateful for the opportunity," she said. "When would you like me to start?" "The fall term begins in 2 weeks. That should give you time to prepare." Mr. Thompson smiled warmly. "I think you will do well here, Miss Everett. Lincoln may seem rough around the edges, but it has good people." "I am beginning to understand that," Natalie replied, her thoughts drifting inevitably to Owen. She saw him regularly now, as he made it a habit to stop by the boarding house whenever he came to town for supplies. Sometimes they talked for hours, sitting on the porch in the evening while the heat of the day slowly dissipated. Other times, he simply sat quietly nearby while she read from her father's journal, sharing memories of a man he had never met but had helped lay to rest. Their conversations ranged from practical matters of frontier life to deeper questions about purpose and meaning, and Natalie found herself increasingly drawn to Owen's steady presence and quiet wisdom. "You ever regret coming west?" she asked him one evening as they watched the stars emerge in the vast Nebraska sky. Owen considered the question carefully, as he did most things. There have been hard times, he admitted. Times when I wondered if I would make it, if the ranch would survive another drought or harsh winter. But regret? No. This land may be unforgiving, but it is also honest. Out here, you know where you stand. Your worth is measured by your character and your effort, not by what family you were born into or how much money your father had. My father used to say something similar, Natalie said softly. He believed the West represented a new beginning, a chance to build something meaningful. That is why he was bringing me here, to give me opportunities I would not have had back in Boston. Boston, Owen repeated, a slight smile playing at his lips. I should have guessed. You have that way of speaking, precise and proper. Are you mocking me, Mr. Bailey? Natalie asked, but there was warmth in her voice rather than offense. Not at all. I find it endearing if you want the truth. Owen's expression grew more serious. You have adapted remarkably well, Natalie. Most people coming from a city like Boston would struggle with the roughness of life out here, but you have not complained once. You have simply done what needed doing. I learned early that complaining changes nothing, Natalie replied. My mother died after a long illness. I watched my father grieve while still managing to provide for us, to keep teaching, to keep living. He taught me that resilience was not about pretending pain did not exist, but about continuing forward despite it. Owen reached over and took her hand, the gesture feeling completely natural despite the relative newness of their acquaintance. Your father taught you well. They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, watching the night deepen around them. Inside the boarding house, Mrs. Carlton peeked through the curtains and smiled to herself, recognizing the signs of a romance taking root. The fall term began, and Natalie threw herself into teaching with enthusiasm that surprised even herself. The children ranged in age from 6 to 14, a mix of farmers' sons and daughters, children of shopkeepers and railroad workers, all hungry for education even if they did not always show it in conventional ways. Natalie found that her Eastern teaching methods needed adjustment for the frontier reality. These children had responsibilities beyond the classroom, chores and work that contributed to their family's survival, and she learned to respect that practical education was as valuable as book learning. She was particularly drawn to a quiet girl named Sarah, 12 years old, who showed remarkable aptitude for reading and writing, but whose father did not see the value in educating daughters beyond basic literacy. Natalie made it her mission to convince the man otherwise, visiting their small farm on a Saturday afternoon to make her case. Mr. Jensen, your daughter has real talent, Natalie said earnestly as they stood in his dusty yard. With proper education, she could become a teacher herself, or a writer. She could support herself independently if the need ever arose. Women do not need to support themselves independently, Jensen replied, though not unkindly. They need to learn how to run a household and raise children. That is what my Sarah needs to know. But what if circumstances change? Natalie pressed. What if she needs those skills someday? I learned that lesson the hard way, Mr. Jensen. My father believed in educating me thoroughly, and that education is what will allow me to survive and build a life here, despite losing everything. Would you not want the same security for Sarah? Something in her words struck home. Jensen's expression shifted, considering. You make a fair point, Miss Everett. My wife died 3 years back, and if I had not been here, if something had happened to me, Sarah and her younger brother would have been in a terrible situation. I suppose having skills beyond housekeeping could be an advantage. Then you will allow her to continue with her advanced studies, Jensen nodded slowly. I will, but she still has chores at home that cannot be neglected. I would never suggest otherwise, Natalie assured him. We will work around her responsibilities. When Natalie returned to town and shared the news with Owen over dinner at the boarding house, his face lit up with pride. "You have a gift for persuasion," he said. "That man is known for being stubborn as a mule." "I simply appealed to his love for his daughter and his practical concerns," Natalie replied. "People are more reasonable than they first appear if you take the time to understand what motivates them." "Is that what you did with me?" Owen asked, a teasing note in his voice. "Figured out what motivates me." Natalie felt her cheeks warm, but she held his gaze. "I think you are motivated by a desire to do right by people, to honor the help you received when you needed it most by passing that help forward to others." Owen's expression grew serious. "You see clearly. That can be a dangerous quality out here, where people often prefer to keep their true selves hidden. Or it can be a valuable one, where genuine connection is rare and therefore precious." Natalie paused, gathering courage. "I value what has grown between us, Owen. This friendship, or whatever we choose to call it. You gave me more than shelter and assistance. You gave me back my sense of worth when I had nothing material to offer in return." "Natalie," Owen said, his voice low and intense, "you have always had worth. The accident did not diminish it, and the loss of your possessions did not change it. That is what I was trying to tell you that first day. Material things fade. They burn, they break, they get left behind. But your spirit, who you are at your core, that is eternal. That is what matters." She felt tears prick her eyes, moved by the sincerity in his words. "How did you become so wise?" "Hard experience," Owen replied with a rueful smile. "And I am not wise, just stubborn about holding on to what I learned from losing everything." He reached across the table and took both her hands in his. "I think I have been waiting for someone who understood that lesson the way you do. Someone who had lived it, not just heard it as a pretty sentiment." "What are you saying?" Natalie asked, though her heart already knew the answer. "I am saying that I have fallen in love with you," Owen said simply. "Somewhere between catching you on that dusty street and sitting here tonight, I fell completely and irrevocably in love with you. Your strength, your resilience, your kindness, your sharp mind, all of it. I love all of it." Natalie felt joy bloom in her chest, pushing back the grief that had shadowed her for months. "I love you too," she whispered. "I have been afraid to admit it, even to myself. It seemed too soon, too improbable that something good could come from such tragedy." "Life is unpredictable that way," Owen said. "The same accident that took your family brought you to me. I would never call that tragedy a blessing, but I will be forever grateful for your presence in my life." They sat in the boarding house dining room long after Mrs. Carlton had cleared the other dishes, talking about their hopes for the future and the practical steps of building a life together. Owen proposed formally a week later, presenting Natalie with a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother. She accepted without hesitation, and they were married in a small ceremony at the church in early November, just as the first serious cold was settling over the Nebraska plains. Natalie moved to Owen's ranch, a transition that proved both exciting and challenging. The ranch house was modest, a 3-room structure that Owen had built himself with help from his hired hands. It needed a woman's touch, he admitted, and Natalie set about making it a home with the few resources available. She sewed curtains from flour sacks, planted a kitchen garden that would provide vegetables come spring, and organized the chaotic interior with efficient determination. The hired hands, 3 men in their 30s who had worked for Owen for several years, were initially skeptical of the educated Eastern woman becoming their boss's wife. But Natalie won them over by respecting their expertise, learning from them, and contributing to the work of the ranch in ways that proved she was not afraid of physical labor. She learned to cook for a crew, to tend animals, to mend equipment, and to keep accounts with meticulous accuracy that revealed several areas where money was being wasted unnecessarily. "Where did you learn to manage books like this?" Owen asked one evening as she showed him her revised accounting system. "My father taught me. He said a woman needed to understand finances whether she married or remained independent. Money is power, he used to say, and ignorance about it makes people vulnerable." Natalie pointed to a column of figures. "You have been paying too much for feed. I talked to Mr. Henderson, and he agreed to lower the price if we commit to buying exclusively from him. That alone will save us nearly $50 a year." Owen pulled her into his arms, kissing the top of her head. "I married a brilliant woman." "You married a practical woman who knows the value of a dollar because she has been without them," Natalie corrected, but she was smiling. The winter proved harsh, testing Natalie's resilience in new ways. The Nebraska cold was different from Boston winters, somehow more penetrating and relentless. There were days when the wind howled across the prairie with such force that leaving the house was dangerous, and they burned through firewood at alarming rates trying to keep the small house warm. But there were also moments of profound beauty, waking to landscapes transformed by snow, sitting by the fire in the evenings while Owen read aloud from the newspapers that arrived from Omaha weeks late, feeling the warmth of shared presence and shared purpose. In February, Natalie discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with a complex mix of emotions. Joy, certainly, at the prospect of bringing new life into the world and building a family with Owen. But also fear, remembering her mother's difficult pregnancies and eventual death from an infection after a miscarriage. And sadness, wishing her father could have known his grandchild, that her mother could have been there to guide her through the experience of becoming a parent herself. Owen was thrilled but also anxious, his protectiveness increasing tenfold. "You should stop doing heavy work," he insisted. "Let the hands handle everything. You should rest." "I am pregnant, not invalid," Natalie replied with gentle firmness. "My body is designed for this. I will be sensible, but I will not become helpless." She continued teaching through the spring, adjusting her schedule to accommodate the pregnancy's demands. The children were fascinated by the visible changes in their teacher's body, and Natalie used the opportunity to teach basic biology and the miracle of life. Some of the more conservative parents objected, but most appreciated her straightforward educational approach. As summer arrived and the baby's birth approached, Mrs. Carleton came to stay at the ranch, bringing her experience as a midwife and her comforting presence. "I have delivered more babies than I can count," she assured Natalie. "You are healthy and strong. You will manage just fine." The labor began on a sweltering August afternoon in 1879 and proved to be long and difficult. Natalie labored through the night and into the next day, exhausting herself before the baby finally made its appearance. Owen paced the main room of the ranch house, listening to his wife's cries of pain and feeling utterly helpless. When Mrs. Carleton finally emerged carrying a squalling infant wrapped in clean cloth, he rushed to meet her. "You have a son," Mrs. Carleton announced with a tired but triumphant smile. "Healthy lungs on this one, and your wife is exhausted but fine. She did remarkably well." Owen took the baby with trembling hands, staring down at the small red face with wonder and terror in equal measure. This tiny creature was his son, his responsibility, living proof that life continued and hope persisted despite past losses. He carried the baby into the bedroom where Natalie lay against the pillows, her hair plastered to her forehead with sweat, her face pale but radiant. "He is beautiful," she whispered as Owen placed the baby in her arms. "He has your chin." "And your eyes, I think," Owen replied, though in truth it was hard to tell much about the newborn's features. What should we name him? Natalie had been thinking about this for months. Thomas, she said softly, after my father, Thomas Bailey. Owen felt his throat tighten with emotion. Your father would be honored. They called the baby Tommy, and he proved to be a robust infant with powerful lungs and an appetite that kept Natalie constantly occupied. Mrs. Carlton stayed for 2 weeks, helping with the household work while Natalie recovered and adjusted to motherhood. The experience was overwhelming and exhausting, and more fulfilling than Natalie could have imagined. This child, this perfect combination of herself and Owen, represented everything she had thought lost when that wagon went over the embankment 14 months earlier. I never imagined this, she told Owen one night as they lay in bed with Tommy sleeping in his cradle beside them. When I was walking through the prairie convinced I would die, I could not have imagined that a year later I would be here with you with our son. Life is strange. Life is resilient, Owen corrected gently. Like you are. You survived because you had the strength to keep going, even when everything seemed lost. And now look what you have built. What we have built, Natalie corrected. I could not have done any of this without you. Owen kissed her softly. We make a good team. Natalie returned to teaching when Tommy was 3 months old, bringing the baby with her to the schoolhouse. The arrangement worked surprisingly well. The older girls took turns helping with Tommy, learning practical childcare skills while Natalie taught lessons. Some of the youngest students were fascinated by the baby, and Natalie found that having an infant in the classroom created opportunities for teaching empathy and responsibility. The years that followed fell into a rhythm of seasons and cycles. The ranch prospered under their combined management, growing from 200 head of cattle to nearly 500. They built an addition onto the house, adding 2 bedrooms and a larger kitchen. Owen hired 2 more hands as the work increased, and Natalie managed the books with increasing sophistication, investing profits wisely and building financial security. Tommy grew into a curious, energetic boy with his father's steady temperament and his mother's quick mind. When he was 3, Natalie became pregnant again, and this time the labor was shorter and easier. They welcomed a daughter they named Alina, called Ella, in the spring of 1882. 2 years later, another daughter arrived, Josephine, called Josie. The house that had once seemed spacious with just 2 people now rang with the sounds of childhood, laughter and arguments, and the constant chaos of family life. Natalie eventually stopped teaching full-time, though she continued to tutor several students privately, including Sarah Jensen, who showed continued academic promise. Instead, she focused her considerable energy on managing the ranch's expanding operations and raising their children with the same values of education and resilience that her father had instilled in her. Owen watched his wife manage their growing empire with awe and love. She had transformed from the desperate woman who collapsed in the street, wearing only a torn dress, into a capable ranch owner, respected community member, and devoted mother. Yet the core of who she was remained unchanged, that spirit he had recognized immediately, the strength and goodness that transcended material circumstances. You remember what I told you the day we met? He asked her one evening as they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard. Tommy was 7 now, Ella 4, and Josie 2, and the noise level was considerable. You said several things that day, Natalie replied with a smile, but I know which words you mean. Material things fade, your spirit shines forever. I was right, Owen said simply. Look at everything you lost and look at everything you became. The material possessions you arrived with would have been used up or worn out by now anyway, but your spirit, that is what built all of this. He gestured to the ranch, the children, the life they had created together. Our spirits, Natalie corrected. You gave me the space to rebuild. You saw my worth when I had nothing material to offer. That gift was everything, Owen. It was the foundation for all of this. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set over the prairie, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Tommy was trying to teach his sisters how to catch grasshoppers, with limited success. Ella was more interested in collecting flowers, and Josie was mostly just running in circles for the joy of movement. I have been thinking about your father lately, Owen said, wondering what he would think if he could see you now. Natalie felt the familiar ache of loss, though it was softer now, buffered by time and happiness. I think he would be proud. He wanted me to have a full life, to use my education to find purpose and meaning. I have all of that. And more, Owen added. You have built something lasting, not just for yourself but for our children and their children. This ranch will stand for generations, God willing. Your father's legacy continues through you, through the values you pass on. Through the values we pass on, Natalie insisted, as she always did when Owen tried to give her too much credit. You are as much a part of this as I am. You taught me about resilience, about the importance of community, about measuring worth by character rather than possessions. Those lessons shape how I raise our children. As full darkness fell, they called the children inside for supper. The evening routine unfolded with practiced efficiency. Washing hands and faces, setting the table, blessing the food, eating while Tommy told elaborate stories about his day, and the girls interrupted with their own important observations. After supper came baths and bedtime stories, goodnight kisses and tucking in, the rituals of parenting that felt both mundane and sacred. When the house was finally quiet and the children asleep, Owen and Natalie sat together in the main room. Natalie was mending one of Tommy's shirts, and Owen was working on tack that needed repair. The work was never truly finished on a ranch, but these quiet evening hours together had become precious to both of them. I received a letter from Mrs. Carlton today, Natalie said as she worked her needle through the fabric. She is thinking of selling the boarding house and moving to Omaha to be near her daughter. That will be a loss for Lincoln, Owen observed. She has been a fixture there for as long as I can remember. She asked if we might be interested in buying the property. She would sell it to us at a fair price, she said, in recognition of our friendship. Natalie looked up from her mending. What do you think? Owen considered the question carefully. What would we do with a boarding house in town? We have our hands full here. We could hire someone to run it, keep it operating as Mrs. Carlton does now. It would provide another source of income, diversify beyond just cattle. And it would give us a place to stay when we need to be in town for extended periods. Natalie's eyes sparkled with the light that always appeared when she was planning something ambitious. We could also expand it slightly, add a few more rooms. Lincoln is growing and the railroad brings more travelers all the time. You have already thought this through completely, have you not? Owen asked with amusement. I may have done some preliminary calculations, Natalie admitted. The numbers work, Owen. We have the capital and the potential return is substantial. Plus, it would honor Mrs. Carlton's legacy, keeping the place operating as she built it. Owen set aside his work and moved to sit beside his wife on the small sofa. If you think we should do it, then we will. I trust your judgment on these matters. You have not steered us wrong yet. Then you are not bothered that your wife has ambitions beyond managing a ranch and raising children. Bothered? Owen laughed. Natalie, I knew who I was marrying. You were never going to be content with a small, quiet life. Your spirit is too large, too vibrant. I would not want to limit you to something less than your full potential. Besides, watching you build and create is one of my great joys. Why would I discourage it? Natalie set aside her mending and kissed him soundly. "You are an unusual man, Owen Bailey. Most men would want their wives to stay home and be satisfied with domestic duties." "Most men do not have the privilege of being married to you," Owen replied. "And most men are fools who cannot see that their wives' success makes their own lives richer, not diminished." They purchased the boarding house from Mrs. Carleton and hired a capable widow named Agnes Moore to manage the day-to-day operations. True to Natalie's vision, they expanded the property and renovated several rooms, improving the comfort and increasing the rates they could charge. The investment proved profitable within 2 years, and the establishment became known as one of the finest accommodations between Omaha and Denver. As the 1880s progressed, Lincoln continued to grow and evolve. The railroad brought more people, more commerce, more opportunities. The Bailey Ranch became one of the most successful operations in the region, known for quality cattle and fair dealings. Natalie became involved in civic affairs, working to establish a proper library and advocating for better educational facilities. She never forgot the role education had played in her survival and was determined that the children of Lincoln would have access to books and learning. The wealth they accumulated never changed the essential nature of their relationship or their values. They lived comfortably but not extravagantly, teaching their children that possessions were tools to be used wisely, not treasures to be hoarded. The old trunk that held Natalie's salvaged belongings, the journal and locket and photograph, sat in a place of honor in their bedroom, a reminder of where they had started and what truly mattered. Tommy grew into a tall, serious boy who loved working with the cattle and showed natural aptitude for ranching. Ella was artistic and sensitive, filling notebooks with drawings and stories. Josie was the adventurous one, always climbing trees or exploring the creek, giving her parents regular heart palpitations. In 1886, Natalie gave birth to their fourth and final child, another son they named James after Owen's father. The addition completed their family in a way that felt exactly right. The children grew up hearing the story of how their parents met, though the details were adjusted to be age-appropriate. They knew their mother had lost everything, and that their father had helped her when she had nothing material to offer in return. They understood that the foundation of their family was built on the principle that a person's worth came from their character, not their possessions. These lessons shaped them profoundly, creating adults who valued substance over appearance and who treated all people with dignity regardless of their circumstances. In 1890, more than a decade after that fateful day when Natalie stumbled into Lincoln wearing only a torn dress, Owen arranged a special anniversary celebration. He took Natalie back to that same spot in front of what was now their boarding house, and in front of a crowd of friends and family, he gave her a gift. It was a simple wooden box, hand-carved and beautiful, and when she opened it, she found a letter written in his careful script. The letter detailed everything he remembered about that first meeting, his thoughts and feelings, his immediate recognition of her strength and worth, his decision to help her not out of obligation, but out of respect for her spirit. He wrote about falling in love with her, building a life together, watching her transform tragedy into triumph. And he concluded with the words that had become their shared philosophy. "Material things fade, but your spirit shines forever. You are my light, my partner, my love." Everything we have built together springs from that truth. You came with only the clothes you wore, and yet you brought everything that mattered. Natalie read the letter with tears streaming down her face, and when she finished, she pulled Owen into an embrace while the crowd applauded. "You saw me," she whispered in his ear. When I had lost everything and felt invisible, you saw exactly who I was. That gift of being truly seen is worth more than all the material wealth in the world. The celebration that followed was joyous, filled with music and food and the warmth of community. Their children performed a small play they had written about pioneers building new lives in the West. Friends toasted their success and their love. Mrs. Carlton, visiting from Omaha, gave a speech about the first time she had seen the bedraggled Eastern woman and the cowboy who caught her, and how she had known immediately that something special was unfolding. "I have seen many people come through my boarding house over the years," Mrs. Carlton said, her voice carrying across the gathered crowd. Some brought trunks full of fancy clothes and expensive goods. Some brought family money and connections. But Natalie Bailey brought something far more valuable. She brought courage, determination, intelligence, and an unbreakable spirit. And Owen Bailey was wise enough to recognize those qualities, even when they were covered in prairie dust. Together, they built something that will last generations, not because of what they accumulated, but because of who they are. As the evening wore on and the celebration continued around them, Owen and Natalie slipped away for a quiet moment alone. They walked to the edge of town where the prairie stretched out endlessly under a blanket of stars, the same view they had shared on so many evenings over the years. "Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if the accident had not happened?" Owen asked. "If you had made it to Kearney with your father and aunt?" Natalie considered the question seriously. "Sometimes," she admitted. "I would have become a teacher there, probably married eventually, had children. It would have been a good life, I think. But it would not have been this life. I would not have you, would not have our children, would not have built what we have built together. The accident was a tragedy, and I will always mourn my father and aunt, but I cannot regret where it led me." "I think about it too," Owen confessed. "I wonder if we would have met somehow anyway if the universe had other plans to bring us together. But then I realize it does not matter. We are together now. We have built a life based on the truest principles I know, and we have raised children who understand what really matters. That is enough. That is everything." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead, feeling the accumulated weight of their years together and the promise of years yet to come. The ranch house behind them glowed with lamplight, and they could hear the distant sounds of their children's laughter mixed with the voices of their guests. They had built something substantial and real, not just physical structures and financial security, but a family bound by love and shared values. "Material things fade," Natalie said softly, repeating the words that had become their shared touchstone. "But your spirit shines forever," Owen completed, pulling her close. "And it does, Natalie. Your spirit shines so brightly it lights up everything around you. It lit up my life from the moment I caught you falling, and it has never dimmed, not once in all these years." They walked back to the celebration hand in hand, two people who had found each other in circumstances of loss and desperation, and had chosen to build something beautiful from the ruins. The party continued late into the night, and when they finally returned to the ranch with their sleepy children, the house felt full of more than just people and possessions. It was full of love and history, and the intangible richness that comes from living according to one's deepest values. The years continued to unfold in their patterns of seasons and cycles. The children grew and eventually began leaving home to build their own lives. Tommy took over the main ranching operations, marrying a capable young woman named Catherine, who shared his dedication to the land. Ella moved to Denver to study art, though she returned frequently to visit and eventually settled in Lincoln permanently, opening a gallery that became regionally famous. Josie married a railroad engineer and traveled extensively, sending letters full of adventures that the whole family treasured. James followed his mother's path into education, becoming a teacher and eventually a school administrator. Owen and Natalie grew older together, their faces weathering like the prairie itself, marked by sun and wind and laughter. They faced challenges and losses, as all lives must, but they faced them together with the same partnership that had defined them from the beginning. When Owen's health began to decline in his 60s, Natalie cared for him with the same determination she brought to everything, refusing to let him give up hope. When Natalie caught pneumonia one harsh winter and nearly died, Owen sat by her bedside for 6 days straight until she turned the corner toward recovery. They celebrated their 25th anniversary, then their 30th, surrounded by children and grandchildren, living proof that what they had built together extended far beyond themselves. The grandchildren loved hearing the story of how Grandma Natalie had arrived with nothing but the clothes she wore, and how Grandpa Owen had been wise enough to see her true worth. The story became family legend, a foundational narrative that shaped how the entire Bailey family understood wealth and value. On a warm summer evening in 1898, 20 years after their first meeting, Owen and Natalie sat together on the porch of the ranch house. They were both in their 60s now, still active and engaged with life, but increasingly content with quiet moments like this one. Tommy and Catherine lived in the main house with their 3 children, and Owen and Natalie had moved into a smaller cottage nearby, built specifically to give the younger generation room to grow while keeping the extended family close. "We did well," Owen said, breaking a long, comfortable silence. "Better than I ever imagined when I was an 18-year-old boy with $50 and a dream." "We did very well," Natalie agreed. "And it all started with a simple act of kindness. You could have walked past me that day, could have left me for someone else to help, but you stopped. You saw me as a person deserving of dignity, not as a problem or a burden. That choice changed everything." "I am glad I stopped," Owen said, reaching for her hand. "Gladder than I have words to express. You have made my life infinitely richer in every way that matters." "And you made mine possible," Natalie replied. "You gave me the space to rebuild, to become who I was meant to be. You never tried to diminish me or limit me. You celebrated my strength instead of feeling threatened by it. That gift is one I've tried to pass on to our children, especially our daughters. I want them to know they can be fully themselves, strong and capable, and still be loved." "They do know," Owen assured her. "You have taught them well, all of them." As the evening deepened into night, their grandchildren came running to say good night, small bodies launching themselves at their grandparents for hugs and kisses. The joy of these moments never faded, this proof that life continued and love multiplied across generations. When the children had been tucked into bed and the ranch had settled into nighttime quiet, Owen and Natalie remained on the porch a while longer, reluctant to leave the peace of the summer evening. "You know what I treasure most?" Natalie asked, her voice thoughtful. "It is not the ranch or the boarding house or even our financial security, though all of those things have their value. What I treasure most is this, right here. Sitting beside you after 40 years of partnership, knowing that I am completely known and completely loved. That is worth more than anything material could ever be." "Material things fade," Owen said, as he had said countless times over their decades together. "But your spirit shines forever," Natalie completed, as she always did. They sat together under the Nebraska stars, 2 people who had found each other in tragedy and built something transcendent from desperation. The ranch around them was quiet except for the distant sound of cattle and the songs of crickets. Inside the houses, their children and grandchildren slept safely, unaware of the profound gratitude their grandparents felt for the chance to build this legacy together. The years moved forward, as years do, bringing both sorrows and joys. They buried friends and celebrated weddings, welcomed new grandchildren, and faced the inevitable losses that come with age. Through it all, they remained partners in the truest sense, supporting each other through every challenge, celebrating every triumph together. Owen lived to the age of 73, passing peacefully in his sleep on a spring morning in 1905, surrounded by family. Natalie held his hand as he took his final breaths, whispering the words that had defined their life together. "Material things fade, but your spirit shines forever. And yours does, my love. Your spirit will shine through our children and grandchildren for generations to come." She lived another 12 years without him, remaining active and engaged with the ranch and the family. She wrote a memoir at the urging of her children, documenting not just her own story but the history of their community and the principles that had guided their family. The book became a local treasure, circulated among families throughout Nebraska, offering both historical record and inspirational message. When Natalie died in the winter of 1917, at the age of 83, 3 generations of Bailey descendants gathered to mourn and celebrate. They buried her beside Owen on the hill overlooking the ranch, the same vista they had gazed upon together for so many years. Her gravestone bore a simple inscription chosen by her children. She came with nothing but her spirit, and that was everything. The Bailey family continued to grow and prosper, maintaining the ranch and the boarding house, but more importantly, maintaining the values that Owen and Natalie had instilled. Every Bailey child learned the story of their great-great-grandmother who arrived in Lincoln with only the clothes she wore, and the great-great-grandfather who was wise enough to see beyond material circumstances, to recognize true worth. That story became their inheritance, more valuable than land or money, a legacy of character and principle that shaped generations. The ranch still stands today, operated by the 6th generation of Baileys, who honor their ancestors by living according to the same truth that Owen spoke on that dusty street in 1878. Material things fade, but the spirit shines forever. And Natalie's spirit, like Owen's, continues to shine through the family they built together. Proof that the most enduring wealth comes not from what we accumulate, but from who we are and how we love.